the Disruptive by Design podcast from AFCEA Signal Media. This episode is one of a three-part series delving into disinformation and misinformation. This episode is called Going Beyond Fake News, Disinformation, and Misinformation. We have two amazing experts from the field, Hannah Becker and retired Army Major Tricia Wyman. Our sponsor for this episode is Janes. For decades, Janes has supported the intelligence and defense community with trusted, foundational, open-source intelligence known as OSINT. Janes' interconnected OSINT data asset, with over 130 million assured connections, links military platforms, subsystems, installations, units, orders of battle, and manufacturers. Platform agnostic, it can be utilized within a broad range of low and high-side systems. In addition, Jane's global team of more than 250 analysts and subject matter experts and their OSINT tradecraft, honed for decades to deliver data and analysis that you can trust, combine to deliver the intelligence needed for mission-critical decisions. Find more about Janes at janes.com. That is Juliet Alpha November Echo Sierra.com, janes.com. And with that, let's delve into disinformation and misinformation.
Hello, and welcome to the Disruptive by Design podcast from AFCEA Signal Media. This episode is called Disinformation and Misinformation, Going Beyond Fake News. And this is part of an exciting three-part series that we're doing on misinformation and disinformation. And we have two amazing subject matter experts who will delve into disinformation today. We've certainly seen disinformation and misinformation as part of politics, especially this week with Russia's attempt to impact voting in the state of Georgia. Misinformation and disinformation is something, however, greater than politics. It's a global cyber threat and something that affects everyone. So our experts are going to delve all into this. Let me first introduce Hannah Becker. She is the Vice President at Becker Digital, a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business that provides strategic consulting and training support to government agencies. And from 2023 to 2024, Hannah served as a fellow at the Joint Special Operations University, where she researched the impacts of misinformation and disinformation on national security and the U.S. military. Hannah has also been a faculty member at Norwich University, the Virginia Military Institute, and Ottawa University, teaching cyber warfare, computer science, economics, and entrepreneurship courses. Additionally, she developed one of the first digital literacy training programs that included misinformation, disinformation related solutions, and they were specifically designed for Gen Z and millennial military audiences. As a military spouse, Hannah has served on the advisory board of the Military Family Advisory Network and as an outreach ambassador for the Military Officers Association of America. She is also a member of our AFCEA Cyber Committee, where she's researched the societal effects of misinformation and disinformation, cybersecurity education, and digital transformation initiatives across public and private sectors. Hannah holds a bachelor's degree from Mississippi State University, a graduate certificate in nonprofit leadership from the American Public University, an MBA, and a Master of Science in Information Technology from Florida Institute of Technology. We also have with us retired Army Major Tricia Wyman, who is the Director for Business Intelligence and Research at Parley. She is an experienced leader in psychological and special operations. Tricia has conducted research on cyber-enabled influence, intelligence, counterproliferation, and cognitive warfare. Her experience includes understanding and implementing innovation and technical systems for influence. Tricia's operations and mixed methods research supported the Center for Global Security Research at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, the U.S. Department of State, DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. Combatant Commands, and other organizations. Tricia also lectures on psychological operations for the Intelligence and Information Operations curriculum at the University of Arizona. She has over 2 decades of military service with deployments and assignments around the world. And Tricia holds a bachelor's degree in global studies with a concentration in political science from Methodist University and a Master of Professional Studies in Security and Safety Leadership from George Washington University. Tricia also earned a Master of Science in Information Strategy and Political Warfare from NPS the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to you both, Hannah and Tricia.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you guys both for joining me on this amazing topic, and to share your experience and your thought leadership is really amazing. If we could start with the basics first, what is misinformation and disinformation? Are they the same thing? Are they different? And Hannah, I guess I'll start with you. Thanks.
Yeah, so both misinformation and disinformation involve spreading false information. I like to think of them as kind of the key difference being intent. So misinformation is false information that's shared without necessarily the intent to deceive or manipulate. It can just be incorrect information, rumors. To give you an example, when my great aunt got on Facebook, I received a lot of misinformation from her on like tips for keeping ghosts out of my house and like financial investment strategies that involved like 4-leaf clovers and nothing real. She didn't mean to like mislead me. She just wasn't correct. She would see stuff online and it had a lot of likes, so she'd send it my way. That's kind of funny, but disinformation is not funny. It's deliberately false information spread with the intent to deceive, to manipulate. It's truly information weaponized. There's malintent behind it. They want to, cause harm. They want to incite destructive actions. The goal is to mislead folks. So we see examples with this. Unfortunately, there's lots of examples of this in recent, recent day. But things like war footage that of Ukraine-Russia war that's actually from a video game, or like generated like deep fake media, false information regarding health things, the pandemic, made up stories on political candidates. This disinformation, there's some malintent behind it. It's not just my great aunt really concerned that my house is haunted. This is often coming from, enemy states, terrorist group, bad actors. It's bad stuff with the goal to hurt folks. So kind of the key takeaway with this, misinformation is unintentional, whereas disinformation is intentional. I think it's important, though, for folks to realize both can be harmful. And I know that's kind of an aspect of what we'll dive into today. Unfortunately, mis and disinformation going out on social media, being spread out across the internet, the impacts don't just stay online. The impacts, it has the potential to impact real people's lives. And it's often not good in terms of the impacts. For me, kind of the event that really drove this home was the role that disinformation played in the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar in 2017, which left many people dead after hate is fueled and spread across Facebook. So that really just kind of opened my eyes to social media, hyperconnectivity, mis and disinformation. This isn't just kind of like, games and, dog photos, and, that it has the potential for a whole new kind of threat level in terms of cyber or even national security.
Okay, sure. And Tricia, how has the terminology itself caused miscommunication, and what are the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, Kimberly. So terminology can be difficult, right? So we have so many different terms besides disinformation and misinformation. There's malinformation, there's propaganda. And then we could go through and go into more forms of catfishing and spearfishing, and different ways that are, a bit more unique and focused within disinformation, right? So with that, one of the challenges that we have are understanding, intent and the accuracy of the problem and the type of information it is, and determining if it's really a threat and to what level is that threat. That can impact people on a personal level, but it can impact people on a larger scale, nation state governments. It can impact, United Nations trying to determine to what degree do they change their policy based off of, some type of sentiment that has been formed around, a massive effort of disinformation. And then on that topic as well as cultural differences can really impact this. You know, some things could be construed differently depending on the context of the disinformation. What I may think of as disinformation here in the United States with my upbringing under the current government and the society that I live in will be completely different, possibly from someone else who's in a different location of the world or socioeconomic status, or just has a different type of knowledge, right, than I do. So uh, we see some of that. I'm trying to think of a really good example, but uh, we see it in the current politics. And so a lot of it, we just have to come together and take the time to actually have that discussion as a group, as a government, and then have those conversations with whoever is also possibly impacted by that disinformation. And then challenges of the commercial sector. So, going beyond fake news, a lot of times we very focus our idea of disinformation is something of the Russians trying to target voters during an election, but it goes so much further than that. I personally think that our local law enforcements have a more difficult time with tackling disinformation as a security problem than our larger national government do. And my anecdotal example of that is, I've been a target of my own, digital creator trying to sell me something that was non-existent, and then, thinking like going, looking at the profile, are they a real person? But no, in essence, I was catfished, and that's its own form of disinformation, right? And so, uh, part of that with the terminology is also how do we create that strategic communication and response that's needed. That's a challenge when you don't have everyone on the same page and understanding the problem in the same way. And so, there's a primacy that needs to occur. It's a fact, unfortunately, that most of the time the fake news will travel faster than the real news, but there is still a sense of primacy, and that is something that has to become, of priority within strategic communication, is making sure that we're proactive, that our government's proactive, putting out a stance on something and being accurate with it so that when this other information, the disinformation comes out, there's more clarity, and responding is less problematic. And we already know, I know we talked in the last webinar about the lack of consistent definitions and regulatory agreement. That remains an issue. I wish it would change. A lot of us wish it would change. But I think as time goes by, we are trying to adapt, and we have more of these discussions, and it brings at least the conversations forward that we have to have. And then we formulate these new ideas and concepts as to how do we tackle this, and continue to have that discussion.
Right, sure. And I guess, how else are you seeing kind of real world threats to misinformation and disinformation, impacting everyday people? And Hannah, I didn't know if you wanted to comment about that.
Yeah. So no one is inherently immune to mis and disinformation. A lot of people think they are because of, certain things. And we're, as Tricia mentioned, we can all be kind of targeted for this and provided, a stellar example of kind of how that can occur. For me, one thing that is really on my radar in terms of threats to mis and dis, something that kind of takes it to a whole new level for me was AI, artificial intelligence, kind of extending the capabilities with mis and disinformation. So basically, technologies like AI can do a lot of really good things. It can also help us identify mis and disinformation, but kind of the two sides to that coin is that AI can also be used to kind of make mis and dis worse. It can be used to rapidly produce and spread realistic content that is deceptive. It's not accurate. It may look accurate, and then it can do such at a scale that is just unlike anything we've ever seen before. So whether that's amplifying, mis and disinformation through chatbots and fake kind of automated engagements to give social media users this impression that the information's valid, can also be used to create, really realistic content, like deep fake type stuff that looks real. Just kind of as a personal anecdote on that, when I started teaching at a senior military college, I had a cadet that was just super pissed off about my stringent grading rubric. And so he decided, to create this kind of like deep fake pornographic media about me and a senior military officer that was in leadership there. And he distributed it on social media for kind of the university community to see, and it with the intent to kind of slander and damage my reputation there. And I thought it was interesting. So the cadets, so they're 18 to 23 years old, commission seeking, military connected students. They thought it was fake. Like they're Gen Zers, they use social media a lot. They're like, oh, that's not real. But interestingly to me, many of the faculty members, including the cyber faculty members and computer science faculty members, saw this fake content and they thought it was real and engaged in like rumors and slander. And I thought that was so interesting to me and kind of an example that we're not just inherently immune to buying into, fake news or disinformation. One thing Tricia said that I thought really kind of drives it home is that mis and disinformation often spreads faster than accurate information. It's designed to be sensationalized. It's designed to grab your attention. It's supposed to be shocking. And for me as a social media user now, if I see something that's like, whoa, that's intense, or I didn't expect that, to me now, that's like a red flag in my own kind of like media consumption because of things like AI being able to build the sensationalized, fake, but looks real type of content. AI is just taking it's enabling mis and disinformation to spread like wildfire across communities or organizations, as in like the military college. It's AI's like pouring kerosene on an already out of control fire. It just magnifies scope, magnifies spread. It magnifies potential destruction like crazy. And so that's something I feel like folks just aren't tracking on, that I think that I wish people could kind of understand. For me, or fake news, propaganda, that's not new, but the scale and scope at which mis and dis can travel is new. So I grew up way out in the middle of nowhere, and we had this neighbor, this is like the early 2000s. Miss Mary Jane, she lived in a tent in the woods. She foraged for food. She got water out of the creek. She would not come to town. She thought the government was out to get her, and when social services would go out and visit her, she would freak out. And she carried with her at all times this little handheld battery operated radio. And she played this one AM radio station that was just conspiracy theories. And I remember as a kid, my family would take her food and check on her. And I remember even as a kid, I was thinking, this radio is not healthy for her. Like, she is just consuming inaccurate information that's stoking fears. And when mis and dis kind of came on became a threat, I found myself thinking about her a lot, because as a kid, I remember thinking, if someone could just kind of take that radio away from her, I wonder if she would be able to, have a kind of healthier outlook on life. And that's an extreme example of someone that their beliefs and actions were shaped by disinformation. That's pre-social media, that's coming through the radio. But today's world, with hyperconnectivity, with mis and dis spreading like wildfire, and then the mass population's kind of lack of digital literacy, the fact that they'll see some deep fake image and assume that it's accurate as opposed to like thinking critically, kind of presents, a similar situation. And for me, that's just really concerning, because it's not one radio station just in the hands of one person living out in the woods. It is spreading across social media. It has the potential to go around the world. And so the impacts of mis and dis are something that I wish people could kind of recognize as being real threats and kind of the scope. And unfortunately, AI has just magnified the potential there.
Right, sure. And Trisha, what are you seeing as far as social media targeting? Who's doing it? What is it? How does it work? And who are, I guess, the vulnerable populations?
Yeah, so now the holidays are coming up, and the elections are over, right? So we always think, as we've been talking about, nation states, the Russians or the Chinese targeting us, right, to influence our policy. But it's con sales artists that are targeting us. It's using persuading via AI voice generation to get money, calling people, claiming to be, somebody who knows someone's son. There's AI generated items that are sold under false pretenses. So this is disinformation, like fake t-shirts that don't exist, and then, you never get it in the mail. Some, it's there's nowadays there's the advertising is not as regulated. We saw with Cambridge Analytica the issues, and now I think so Tint Media is another one. But even our own advertising and marketing industries with the ad tech universal IDs and the alt ID. If you've ever noticed when you were having a conversation with somebody, and then the next thing you know, it starts popping up in your news feed, very relevant, content. That content could possibly be disinformation. And because of the lack of policy and how easy it is to, for digital influencers and companies within these industries to stand up companies, and other nation states will do this too. So obviously Russia and China have been doing this. Definitely Russia. A lot of my research was on that. But even, companies, people standing up these companies just to temporarily buy the ad tech data and then be able to target. And then, I'm sure Hannah could go into more detail about like physical targeting and the actual, gaining access that way. So if you combine that with over time influencing with disinformation to an individual, this is stuff that happens every day in social media targeting. It's not just nation states attacking, right? So these online social networks, scaled networks, essentially with a scaled network, it's creating nodes such as like bots to actually influence a certain group of individuals and actors that have about a certain type of belief system. So if it's someone who's probably going to be easily persuaded by this disinformation, that's probably who's going to be targeted within this scaled network. It's basically like creating a group of nodes and agents pretending to be people, bots, possibly, or people paid to disseminate this stuff that actually become they are viewed as credible often. And so, you know, AI generation makes this way too easy nowadays. Everything from content to creating, the actual nodes, agents, the social media handles online. A lot of this stuff can be done very easily and quickly. And some of them can just stay somewhat neutral, create a platform, and then when the time is right, be activated, right? Um, and so, as we get close to the holidays, obviously, I think people need to pay more attention of, hey, it's not just a political issue with this information, it's also a personal, a familial, and a social one. And so, I know here shortly we'll probably talk about protection measures, but you know, there's sock puppet is another term that's used online. It's an online identity used to deceive. Misleading uses of online identities, as I mentioned before. Sea lining is another term that's used. It's a type of trolling and harassment where people are pursued persistently with requests for evidence or information, questioned, on and on. Astroturfing. That's essentially, masking the sponsor of a message, whether that be a nation state or maybe it could be a lobbyist, could be it could be multiple, it could be criminal, trying to actually get, someone to buy something. Um, and then there's catfishing. We all think of catfishing as like bad dating experience, right? But really that's posing as a certain type of persona and a person. It's disinformation in itself, right? And creating that sock puppet or the fake identity to target a victim on social media. And it's unfortunately it goes beyond romance. It goes to, people giving up their money, people giving up valuable information about themselves, and then also people making themselves vulnerable to this type of stuff online. And people are telling, unfortunately, people will give up information, uh, being naive sometimes and or uneducated or just unknowing, that it will pay the price. They'll pay the price for life. I mean, can you imagine giving someone your bank account number, thinking that you're doing the right thing, helping somebody? Unfortunately, this has been happening for a while, and with this specifically, with the money fraud and targeting, we see this a lot with older people, right? Where they get cold calls on the phone, and they have either an AI generated voice or someone posing. And again, this is a form of disinformation that we need to consider as we go forward.
Right, sure. And how it does seem all encompassing, very overwhelming. How can we protect ourselves, our families, our friends, our organizations, even our nation? And Hannah, maybe you could speak to kind of individually how to protect ourselves.
Yeah. So there's not really kind of a one size fits all one-time solution for mis and disinformation. I really appreciated kind of how Trisha mentioned with disinformation's capabilities of being really targeted to someone. So kind of through ad technology, knowing their fears, knowing, cognitive biases, knowing their concerns, basically what they're Googling routinely. And all of this can kind of, these campaigns can, they just go to a whole new level than just, a conspiracy theorist radio show or a billboard that's incorrect, because they have that much information on the folks that that will be seeing it. So there's really not just a one size fits all. There's no magic switch to just turn it all off in terms of the problems related to mis and dis. For me, I tend to focus on kind of a three kind of domain solution, if you will. So needed to address mis and disinformation on the platform front, on an organization standpoint. So if it's like a federal agency, which we see a lot during natural disasters like hurricanes, wildfires, federal agency that is their services are being impacted by mis and disinformation. And then the third kind of area is the individual response. So the way I approach it is we need to address on all three levels. For me, the one that I encounter the most resistance on when I talk about it, that kind of surprises me, is the individual kind of level of defense and security. So I did want to just kind of discuss that. So with the individual level, we are all potential targets of disinformation. And there's not, ad blocker software you can buy for disinformation, like to just block it all out. There's essentially kind of a battle for your cognitive space, your mind, your beliefs, your values when it comes to disinformation. And, people need to be aware of what's going on, be aware of how disinformation is being used, the targeting, the scope, all of that, have an awareness of it, and invest in their own kind of digital literacy. So strengthen their skills for determining of what, whether something is fact or fiction there. And then also understand how this information in the information age impacts their lives. So essentially, we've got kind of this digital fog that we're all kind of trying to wade through as we're bombarded by information coming through technology. We've got to be able to navigate this, whereas our enemies will use disinformation to try to exacerbate divides in our communities, kind of damage and dismantle things like organizations, and even our nation. And so that's just kind of the battle space that we're all kind of operating on. So for me, the big clicker is, kind of ensuring that you are aware of what's going on, are aware of, kind of the need to strengthen your skills on digital literacy. For me, I think about on the individual level, protecting ourselves from the threats of mis and disinformation, somewhat like kind of firearms training. I grew up very rural area, guns are everywhere, hunting is just kind of a way of life. And our 4-H, the 4-H programs, the agents would come into the school, even in elementary school, and they would teach us about firearms safety, because guns were just kind of prolific in the community. They would be in homes, they would be in vehicles. You hope every gun owner is responsible and would secure their firearms. However, that wasn't always the case. So the approach was, we'll ensure children, youth understand, safe handling of firearms, because gun accidents was a reality in terms of our hunting accidents. That was a reality of life where I was. And so they started us early on kind of teaching us the potential dangers of firearms and ensuring that we could keep ourselves and people around us safe if a firearm was in the vicinity. So I think of digital literacy a little bit like that. I wish people would recognize the potential danger to themselves, their family, their community, their organizations with this and dis, and kind of prioritize learning how to be responsible, learning how to kind of navigate this world where this is a real threat. We as individuals may have not created this problem. We most of us on the listening to the podcast, We didn't develop the social media apps. We're not launching influence campaigns against our own people. We didn't create the problem, but we're all impacted by it. And kind of the long-term solution, I think a big component of that is the individual kind of education aspect and learning how to navigate kind of the digital fog that mis and disinformation presents in a way that, we can stay safe and support our communities and, our organizations.
Right, sure. Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for that. And Tricia, what kind of protections are needed from both foreign state and commercial perspectives, and how to protect us in that from that vein? Thanks.
Yeah, a lot that applies with what Hannah said at the individual level. We think of psychology at the individual level. It's taught exactly for larger scale for government, groupthink, right? So all those concepts can be very applicable at the higher governmental level. But some things I really want to hone in on are uh, the fact that you know that advertising and the regulation that we have right now, there's still a lot of dominance by artificial intelligence that allows certain content to be paid for and just, posted, and there's no primacy on true information. And so being able to have clarity in our policy and how advertising and marketing online is conducted is one really big step that our government needs to do. Is it difficult? Absolutely, because the internet is constantly changing. There's new accounts and new algorithms and new companies and new thought leaders who are influencing all of this, and money does a lot to influence all of this environment, right? So that's, I think, the biggest thing that would impact some change. It's one of the things too is I think that unfortunately our own news networks a lot of times also have some confirmation bias and echo chambers. And so I think reconsidering how our news is news and you know, I think I hate to bring up the recent elections, but we saw a lot of that. Uh, and it's unfortunate, but how does our government at least come in and have that discussion? Like, hey, what's the most neutral way to present our news so that it doesn't get misconstrued as we're trying to copy and cut and paste and make something look even worse than what it was intended to be, right? And it's in its own like form of misinformation per se, or malinformation. And not necessarily even saying any of it's disinformation, just having the wrong intent or the wrong information construed entirely wrong. Sources of information are our own government leaders need to not be echo chambers. I know me fundamentally, I know what my beliefs are and all these things, but I definitely, even for key leaders, for people at large, when they're looking at information, following multiple sources, and then also knowing what your own biases are and being able to at least be receptive to opening up to those other considerations and information that's out there really can go a long way, because then we can start to unravel and dissect, well, what would be the intent with these alternate narratives, right? And what could be driving this type of disinformation? Making a holistic picture of the existing information so that we can decipher, the intent and why it would be in existence to begin with. Like our government, and then, I mean, generally, we always feel as though we have to react immediately, right? And we really don't unless it's, I mean, I would not want to say like if someone's got a gun to their head, okay, I understand like that's an existential threat and that's like in your face. But getting a phone call or getting a news article pop up in your feed, these are things that we can delay on making a decision on. And so that also goes to say for our national level, right? It's the same reason why we have different commissions on such issues. Even there's been multiple commissions on facing different types of disinformation campaigns. And so, and it does force the institution, our government, to really do that holistic look, that's needed with disinformation. Um, having like Hannah, you gave the example with the radio. I even remember myself uh, when I didn't want to pay for cable or for cable TV, having a little antenna and seeing like what's the free message that I'll get, and it's not going to be your mainstream media. There's definitely some alternate media that's coming on those sources, and so even something like that, being able to talk to your family and your friends and even people that you're not comfortable with, it's the same level of our government, taking a neutral, non-political stance and having a discussion amongst individuals, is important, right? And so let's see, that those are the big ones. I already mentioned needing industry licensing and regulation. I know that net neutrality is like it's been going back and forth over the last decade as to, how do we how do we deal with freedom of speech and freedom of the internet versus allowing all these alternate narratives that contain disinformation to get the same space, right? But again, being able to collaborate with the commercial organizations, whether it be, X, Facebook, different platforms, these are critical at the government level to tackle these types of problems. Are they always going to have the discussion they want to have? Probably not. I mean, that's just like human conflict in its nature, right? But the fact that both parties could have that, that conversation and at least have that effort is critical. Um, Hannah, you talked about also the education piece. The Finnish, for example, they actually they are teaching their lower level elementary grades how to acknowledge and understand what's disinformation. I know some other European partners are doing the same. I know much more now than I think the United States is, unfortunately. But these are types of initiatives too that I think would support, us having that understanding and digital literacy, and even just literacy in general, right? But and then my last comment on this is I mentioned the strategic communication, the primacy. That's how one way we protect ourselves is, it's one thing if me as an individual and I'm transparent and people know what I stand for, but it's even more so critical for a government and to put the information out there that they want out there before these alternate narratives come out as, forms of disinformation. People can try to protect themselves all day long. That's one thing that could result in malinformation using someone's emails and posting them out of context or photos and what happened to you, Hannah. Like these are really horrible things. And so limiting the types of information, but also putting the right information out there at a government level is like critical, right? But I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Kimberly. I could probably keep going on this topic for too
Right.
long.
Right, sure. Both of your in-depth knowledge on this is so helpful to kind of hear your perspectives and kind of, what to do. Um, is there anything else you wanted to highlight or share about this topic?
I would like to say that disinformation, it became in the last, like, I'd say more so in America, we saw disinformation in the Cold War that came to light, right? Pretty massive effort, right, from the Soviet Union. And then in the recent decade, we've had this push on disinformation, and that snap thought is we always consider it just the digital domain, right? But it expands beyond that. It could be people face to face handing out flyers, right? And so one of the critical things to remember with this is even though, we every day experience the digital world, these things are possible outside of that, with possibly with it just makes it easier on the internet to do this stuff, right? And so going forward, knowing if I, for example, am unwitting agent passing on information, whether I'm putting a flyer out somewhere or something with, something I think is a grassroots initiative, right? But it ends up being disinformation. Like these things can be damaging. So just remembering as we go forward that through the existence of mankind, there's been disinformation. We just didn't have the same word to to describe it. So
Right, sure. Anything else from you, Hannah? And then I'll go into the helpful resources you all provided.
Yeah, no, Trisha made a great point. I think people tend to think of disinformation as, oh, that's just a tech problem. And it's really, it has the potential to go so much farther beyond that. I tell folks, the blast radius of mis and disinformation is expansive, and it goes beyond the screen. It can send shockwaves through our community, our organizations, our nation. And I just, kind of can't harp enough on, folks need to be aware of what kind of the state of that is, and to just kind of understand the threats that can come with that. And that, as Trisha mentioned and provided so many great examples, it's evolving, right? What we're dealing with now in terms of how it's being delivered, how it's being distributed, maybe somewhat different than, dropping pamphlets from an airplane, or even with the, aspects of information warfare in the Cold War. But this isn't this is a threat that can be mitigated. It can be, neutralized. There are defenses against it. And so I just want to thank folks listening to the podcast for, kind of investing in their own education on this. If everyone was to do that, kind of enemy states, kind of mortaring us with disinformation would have no effect, because we would all know, that it was fake, and we wouldn't act on it. And so hopefully, that will be kind of part of our future in terms of that kind of collective kind of cognitive resilience to this.
Right, I love that sentiment. And so here are some resources you can turn to. Trisha, you mentioned the United Nations fact sheet. Can you describe that? I love how you talked about that.
yeah, I really like this fact sheet because it's to the point. It explains very succinctly misinformation and disinformation, but it also talks about the different forms and the types, and how these two terms and concepts are really, show themselves in all these other ways. Like I had mentioned, the catfishing, the sea lioning, going beyond just the screenshots and that type of stuff being shared, but also telephone calls and whatnot, and how these things actually relate to disinformation. And it's a very easy sheet to read, and then taking those terms and anything that someone's curious on, you can do further research about that.
Right, love that. Yeah, so we'll put the link up there, but it is from the United Nations, hcr.org. And then Becker Digital has a misinformation, disinformation online hub. Tons of resources there. Hannah, did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so we've got some information on kind of that individual defense. So digital literacy, a bunch of free fun stuff on there for all ages, including like elementary with free apps for enhancing their digital literacy skills. And then also information on organizations for our company. We work exclusively with the public sector, so it's government and nonprofit organizations. But just if someone wants more information on how to address things at that level, there's resources.
Right, love it. And then the AFCEA Cyber Committee, several members, including Hannah, created a white paper called A Cyber Curriculum for a Digital Workforce. And that has information on digital literacy education for all levels, kindergarten through post-secondary. So that's a great resource. And then check out the previous webinar called Digital Chatter, the growing challenge of misinformation, disinformation. I think we all did that last year, which I can't believe. It's been almost a year. And there's also a paper that corresponds with that. And then Becker Digital is www.becker-digital.com. And you can also find Hannah on LinkedIn and also Major Wyman on LinkedIn. So thanks to you both for taking the time to walk through all this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly.
And thanks to our sponsor for this episode, Janes. You can find more information about their capabilities at janes.com, JANES.com. And thank you so much.